Tonight, we are opening an old wartime diary. It belonged to William B. Ruth, an American soldier serving with the 3rd Armored Division during the winter of 1944. The events, places, and people in this story come from the diary he kept during the war and later transcribed for his family. The small sensory details between those events are gentle reconstructions, added only to help us imagine the quiet spaces around his words. So settle in, let the room grow still, and travel back with me to Belgium in the last cold days before Christmas. For more than 2 months, the radio had been unusually quiet. Then, on the 16th of December, it came alive. Messages arrived one after another. Somewhere beyond the fog, German forces had begun a major attack through the Ardennes. No one around William yet knew where the main blow would fall. Men were told to pack their equipment and be ready to move with almost no warning. For 4 days, they waited and listened. On the 20th of December, the order finally came. The unit collected its tracked vehicles and began moving west from Brainig. The retreat took them into muddy roads, bitter cold, and fog so thick that the driver could barely follow the road. William, and a man everyone called Tex, helped guide him through the darkness. The column moved slowly. Again and again it stopped, or half-track was winched back onto the road. Some vehicles had sunk too deeply into the mud and were left behind for maintenance crews. In the darkness above them, flying bombs passed through the cloud. A few came down nearby, their distant impacts rolling across the countryside. The weather covered the front in a freezing mist. Snow glazed the roads until they became narrow ribbons of ice. Tanks slid toward ditches. Trucks struggled on the hills. Snowdrifts hid fields that had been marked for mines, and the ground was too hard for an easy foxhole. William later found one sentence for the strange beauty of it all. The Ardennes look like a Christmas card, but it is agony all the way. Eventually, the column reached through. There was no warm room waiting for them. The men used the wall of a textile mill as a windbreak and tried to sleep beside it. Fog still hid the battle. William and Tex took turns at the radio, listening to voices that could tell them only fragments of what was happening. One man slept, while the other listened, then changed places. By morning, the cold had settled into their uniforms, their boots, and the metal of the vehicle. The next day they moved again, this time into Spa. Before the war, the Casino de Spa had been an elegant resort, a place of bright rooms, music, and visitors with money to spend. Now American soldiers entered it carrying winter mud on their boots and a war at their backs. Christmas Eve arrived in confusion. Morale was low, but someone discovered a truckload of champagne. The mess sergeant, John Barclay, began preparing a turkey dinner around midnight. For a little while, the men tried to turn the strange old casino into a place of warmth and celebration. At 2 in the morning, the order came to move out. The Germans were attacking again. Captain Paul Woods now faced an awkward problem. Too many of the men had been drinking champagne and were not ready to drive a column of heavy vehicles through sea darkness. William was asked to radio headquarters and explain they were given to recover and prepare. By 4 o'clock, the column was as ready. The partially roasted turkeys were loaded into a truck. Then an order came to unload them. The field kitchen was set up again. An hour later, the men were told to load everything once more. The turkeys went in, out of the truck, while the battle shifted somewhere beyond the fog. At last, around 8 in the morning, word arrived that the immediate danger had passed. A company of American tanks had stopped the attack. The field kitchen was opened again, and the men finally ate their Christmas turkey. It was not the Christmas they had imagined. There were no familiar rooms, no family table, and no certainty about the next hour. But for a little while, there was hot food, exhausted laughter, and the relief of remaining where they were. At about 3 in the afternoon on Christmas Day, they left Spa. For the first time since the German offensive began, the sky was clear. The temperature was around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, well below freezing. High above the roads, bombers drew long white trails across the blue. Fighter aircraft moved through the open sky. After days of fog, the returning air power was a sign that the weather had changed, and perhaps the battle with it. William looked up and, despite everything, felt something of Christmas. The column drove into the evening and reached Louvigny around 6 o'clock. They parked their half-track beside a Belgian home. Almost immediately, a man and woman invited them inside. The couple were grateful to the Americans, and they also understood that a military vehicle beside their house offered a little protection. They gave the soldiers bean soup and steak, an extraordinary meal in a country where good food had become difficult to find. Later, they offered a little cognac. Imagine the change. Outside, the half-track stood in the freezing dark. Inside, there was a table, a lamp, the steam of soup, and voices finding a way across 2 languages. The war had not disappeared, but for one evening it had moved a little farther from the center of the room. At midnight, William went outside to stand guard. The night was clear and sharp. Snow reflected the moonlight. The house behind him had grown quiet, and the road ahead lay pale beneath the winter sky. He thought, home. He wondered how his family was spending Christmas and whether they might be looking at the same moon. He was far from them, standing beside a half-track in Belgium, yet the stillness of that night carried something familiar. The moon, the cold, and the thought of people waiting at home were enough to preserve a small piece of the holiday. The next day, the unit traveled about 20 miles south to Toulon. Once again, a Belgian family opened its home to them. This time, their hosts were an elderly woman and her son, Lucien Dumont. Lucien was an artist and had also been involved with the Belgian underground. A hidden radio transmitter in the attic could receive broadcasts from Paris and London. His mother, 75 years old, moved through the house with rosary beads in her hands. Each distant artillery report frightened her. She feared that the Germans might return and take her son away. The Americans brought no promise that the danger was over. They could only stay for a while, share the room, and make the house feel a little less exposed. During the visit, William noticed a painting Lucien had made. It showed a water wheel and a line of trees. Lucien gave it to him, adding a message of friendship and gratitude for William's fiancée. The painting survived the war. Years later, it still hung in William's home. This is one of the quiet things a diary can preserve. Not only the movement of armies, but the journey of a single painting from a frightened Belgian house to an American living room. William also kept the letters he sent to Lille. Wartime censorship meant that he could say very little about his location or the fighting. Most of his letters spoke instead about family and friends. His father wrote to him every day through December. The letters did not arrive one by one. They came in bundles, several ordinary days of home at once. Before William went overseas, he and his father had devised a private code. The first capital letter of each sentence could be placed beside the next, quietly spelling a location or a short message. A censor reading the page would see only an ordinary family letter. William's father, where his son had been. The code worked, and perhaps that mattered because so much else was uncertain. Roads vanished into fog. Orders changed in an hour. Radios carried broken pieces of a battle, but a father at home could still recognize a message hidden inside the shape of his son's sentences. When we remember the Battle of the Bulge, we often remember maps, arrows, divisions, and dates. Those things are important. The German offensive began on the 16th of December, 1944, and the Ardennes campaign continued into January. But William Ruth's diary leaves us with another kind of map. It marks a textile mill wall where men tried sleep, an old casino where turkeys were loaded and unloaded before dawn, a Belgian with bean soup and steak, a moonlit road at midnight, a woman holding rosary beads, a painting of a water wheel, and letters from a faithful father, arriving in bundles. These were not details outside history, they were the way history was lived. For tonight, we can close the diary there. On Christmas night, in the frozen Ardennes, the fire is low, the radio has grown quiet again. Beyond the window, the snow is under the moon, and a young soldier keeps watch while the household sleeps. You do not need watch with him. Let the road fade into the dark, let the distant engines become only wind, and let this old Christmas memory return gently to its page. Good night,